Dear friends, welcome aboard our newest destination. In this video, I'll be telling you stories about discoveries, treaties and war that shaped our past, immigration, forceful or voluntary, and that's about our upbringing to understand who we are, who I am at least. And as you might notice, all the stories that I'm telling, the history, is interconnected, and I find this fascinating. I've been in many places where I've seen monuments, places, characters that shape the stories that I'm telling you about. And sometimes I've been in the middle of historical events myself, and I'll tell you about this in due course. And I hope you enjoy the videos. This will be a series of videos because the history is long. I hope you enjoy. Thank you. Today's video starts in East Africa, in Mombasa. In my time at Air Europe, Laudair, Italy and Air Italy, Mombasa was a major destination for Italian tourists. Actually, still is. Fort Jesus, Fortaleza de Jesus, is one of the major tourist attractions in Mombasa. We went, me and my family, we went on a program with a tour in the old Mombasa port and walk in the old town of Mombasa to the fort, where we were treated with a light and sound history of the place, and a dinner with typical food, and I must say it was unique and unforgettable. At the very entrance of the fort, I noticed an old plaque posed by the Portuguese at the time, honoring a commander of the fort with inscriptions exalting who he was and his deeds as governor. Unfortunately, I also noticed recently that the plaque does not exist anymore. I tried to get these inscriptions from somewhere, I couldn't, as they were nasty, to say the least, and would not be political correct to have such a text of nasty deeds on a UNESCO landmark. Anyway, after I edited the video, I found a translation of the text of the plaque I was looking for, and I leave you to read. As you can see, is very nasty. The fort was constructed by the Portuguese to defend their trade and their routes from Portugal to India, where they would go to Goa. And the fort was constructed actually. João Bautista Cairato, his real name is Giovanni Battista Cairato. Cairati is an Italian architect and built many fortresses in India, in the East Africa, and in the Middle East. And not only for the Portuguese. Here I interrupt the fort narrative and its importance to put the context in the other side of the globe. I'll come back later as we go along with this video. When the Spanish and Portuguese started their venture navigating far and beyond the known world to the Europeans, I mentioned this on the previous video, on Navigator 3, they agreed to divide the world in half, stating that the land and trade in one half would be Spanish and the other Portuguese. That was known as the Tordesillas Treaty. Mombasa and India, as well as other territories, were on the Portuguese side of this half globe. Therefore, the construction of Fort Jesus. Navigating away from African coast to the west, the Portuguese landed in Brazil, The expedition was under the command of Pedro Álvares Cabral, seen here on the top right. And later on, the coast was mapped by Amerigo Vespucci, the guy that the continent was named after him. He was a Florentine cartographer, and he was very fundamental in the early Americans mapping. Without knowing what land was west of the line, on this treaty the Portuguese they went their ways to discover, in brackets, it, and they landed in Brazil, in the city of Porto Seguro, state of Bahia. The monument seen here is the oldest monument in existence in Brazil, and it was put there to celebrate the discovery of Brazil. The Portuguese were not settlers. They were not there to colonize with their families or bringing people to occupy the land. They have the rights to exploit, and it was given by the crown to noblemen in Portugal as captaincies. And they have to, whatever they could get from their exploitation, they would take back to Portugal. And to achieve this, one of their obligations, labor-wise, was to enslave the Indian population. The experience didn't work as predicted. Only two of them prospered, Pernambuco and São Vicente. Slavery was not unknown to the Indians before the arrival of the Europeans. Actually, they would enslave tribes defeated in battle, and some of them, by being cannibals, would allow the defeated to survive as a slave. Not in the economical sense of it, but as a trophy. Most notably, the tribe Tupinambá. The Jesuits, or the Company of Jesus, founded by Santo Inácio de Loyola, arrived in the New World, and they are contrary to slavery. And with the Guarani, one of the most prolific tribes on the coast, they went inland and formed a reduction, the missions, and away from the incursions of the Portuguese to capture them, actually to the border with the Spanish territory. One of the Jesuit priests, José de Anchieta, founded a school for the Indians and created the grammar for the Guarani language. Around the school he founded grew up the city of São Paulo. The region was the most active in the movement inland, and these movements were called flags, as they were sponsored by the states, and entry, it was privately sponsored. Those flags and entries had the objective of collecting valuable minerals and capture the Indians in the process. Back to the fort, as an important military and commercial point, it was a center of slave trade of captured natives from that part of Africa. That called the attention of the Omanis that went there fighting back and forth with the Portuguese until they expelled later the Portuguese. From there, taking over the slave commerce, now trading with the English, French, Dutch, and eventually with the Portuguese themselves. The Omanis stayed there until defeated by the British that took over of Kenya as a colony. And that's another story for others to tell. With the reign of Portugal vacant in 1580, there was no heir to the throne. The King of Spain, Felipe II, became the King of Portugal, and the Tordesillas Treaty became null for any effect. So those expeditions, flags, and entries went further inland, threatening the reduction of the Jesuits that started arming the Guaranis to defend themselves. When the new king took over the throne in Portugal, Dom José I, a new treaty was signed in 1750, recreating borders, but now under the base of Roman law, that states that who lives in the land own the land, thus practically creating the borders of Brazil we know today. Here I make another break, another parenthesis to explain what was happening in the metropolis, Lisbon, at the same period. The Secretary of State from Dom José I was Mr. Sebastião José de Carvalho e Melo, Marquis of Pombal and Count of Oeiras. He was a Portuguese nobleman, diplomat, and statesman. He's considered, even today, one of the most controversial and charismatic figures in the Portuguese history. He was a representative of the enlightened despotism in Portugal in the 18th century. He lived in a period of history marked by the Enlightenment. To this end, he initiated various administrative, economics, and social reforms, banned the importation of slaves into mainland Portugal on February 12, 1761, and ended the discrimination against new Christians despite not having officially extinguished the Portuguese Inquisition, which was placed under royal authority, was enforced by law until 1821. On the other hand, he created the Real Mesa Censoria in 1768 with the aim of completely transferring to the state its supervision of works intended to be published or disseminated in the kingdom, which until then had been the responsibility of the Holy Office. And his administration was marked by two famous setbacks. The first was the Lisbon earthquake in 1755, a challenge that gave him the historic role of architectonic renovator of the city. Shortly after was the Tavares process. That process was an intrigue with dramatic consequences. And he was one of the main responsible for the expulsion of the Jesuits from Portugal and its colonies. The earthquake affected a total area of 10 million square kilometers and reached a magnitude of 8.5 to 8.7 on the Richter scale. And there were places where the tremors were not felt, but the effects were manifested under the waters. It struck a large part of Europe, Africa, and even America, but caused the greatest damage in the southwestern part of the old continent. Lisbon alone is estimated that between 25 and 30% of the population died in the event. That event had profound repercussions in the Portuguese society, so much so that colonial ambitions of Portugal in the 18th century were totally frustrated, back to Brazil and the Portuguese. With the turmoil in Portugal as well as the Treaty of Madrid, the Jesuits were expelled from Portugal and the colonies. But the worst case was the reductions, the missions was also expelled from Portuguese territory, which were not accepted by the Guarani Indians, and that was the main cause of the Guarani War. Sepete Araju was an Indian, and he led the Indians that were defeated by more modern and potent army in the Battle of Caipoaté in 1756. With the end of the war and the situation of having to reconstruct the capital in Portugal, the Marquis do Pombal practically ended the Inquisition in Portugal, passed the Censorian Act, and transferred powers from the church to the state, and most importantly of all, he ended the slavery of the Indians, which in turn increased the black slave trade from the Portuguese colonies of Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea, since they had lost the Fort Jesus and Mombasa to the Omanis. As this story is terribly dramatic and long, nonetheless fascinating, we arrive at the end of this part one. I hope you have enjoyed so far. Thank you very much for bearing with me till the end. And because I wanted to tell you the stories, as I've seen these places, been there to places where this drama unfold, and I just can imagine how it was for these doomed people that was forcibly sent into immigration into Americas. In this case, I'm talking about South America. Next, I'll talk about how this shameless trade ended, and who came replacing the slave people in the work and the fields, and how was life with them afterwards. Please, if you like these videos, click the like button, share it, and subscribe to this channel, and stay safe. Thank you very much. Bye bye.